Hello, this is the lecture for Monday, March 8th, 2021 for European history. What we began with are a series of images for people that I will include in today's online lesson as attachments or links. These were pictures of Kaiser Wilhelm II of the House of Hohenzollern, both early in his reign and during World War I, when a lot of the life had been beaten out of him by experience. I showed Tsar Nicholas II of the House of Romanov and his family. I showed his resemblance to King George V of the House of Saxe-Coburg-Gotha of England, and pictures of them together. And I showed the old Emperor Franz Josef of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, a man whose reign stretched from just before the 1848 year of revolution all the way through the second third of World War I. Amazingly long-lived emperor, but a man who lived long enough to see everyone he loved die. And this melancholy suffuses his later life. Also, his relative infirmity means that the government of Austria-Hungary is run by various ministers and bureaucrats, including a fellow named Konrad von Hotzendorf, who's the head of the Austro-Hungarian General Staff. Probably should have shown you his picture. And is probably more responsible for igniting World War I than almost anyone else, except for the last picture I showed, which was of the most successful terrorist in human history, bar none, Gavrilo Princip, a Bosnian Serb whose terrorist action changed everything, and I mean everything, in the world. We'll talk about them a little bit later. So now that we've done that, and we've introduced things, I will remind you that tomorrow is probably going to be your unit exam. So you should be ready for that. Today's lecture will culminate Unit 3, which is the period between the Napoleonic Wars ending in 1815 and World War I starting in 1914. So, on Friday, I covered briefly the nature of Wilhelm II of the German Empire's personality, and how it was a contributing factor to tensions with England and to World War I. His insistence on colony building, on fleet building, offend the British, and ultimately drive them into the most unlikely alliance. Constitutional monarchy of Great Britain, British Empire, maritime empire that had been in conflict with France once a century for the last 1,000 years, and that had been in conflict with Russia over the border between British India and Russian Central Asia for the last 200 years, is going to ally with both of those countries against Britain's traditional ally in continental affairs, Germany. The British traditionally ally with Prussia and with Germany in wars against the French and the Austrians and the Russians, but now these alliances are reversed. One reason for this is simple strength. In Napoleon's time, France had the population boom over all other European countries. That means more workers and more soldiers under Napoleon's command. With the unification of Germany in 1871, the German Empire becomes the great colossus of Europe, having a population in excess of anything that the French or the British have. The Russians, of course, have a bigger population, but the German population is highly educated, highly skilled, highly cohesive, highly disciplined, and because of their possession of the Ruhr Valley is in possession of the heartland of European mainland industrialism. So Germany is a colossus whose strength alone would provoke their neighbors into an alliance against Germany for mutual protection. But Wilhelm at the helm of the German Empire really heightens the tension that everyone feels about Germany's strength. Had there been a calm person at the helm of German affairs, they might have, as Bismarck was, been able to offset the raw power of Germany with a sense that this government will never be a problem. This government has no interest, no ambitions to further mess with the French or the Russians or the British. They have achieved their goals. But Wilhelm was not that man. And as earnest of this, because Wilhelm wanted to catch up in status with his British imperial cousins, he insisted that Germany build a high seas fleet that would challenge the British directly. And with the building of His Majesty's ship Dreadnought, a revolution in battleship design, suddenly the advantage Britain had in pre-dreadnought battleships was erased, and the German fleet began directly competing, and German industry was greater than British industry at that point. Luckily for Britain, the Germans also had to build howitzers for their massive, massive army. And so dreadnoughts, in dreadnoughts, they did fall behind the British, but only because the British spent ridiculous amounts of money that they'd rather have spent on other things on the dreadnoughts. So, two alliances were set up, the Triple Entente, or the Entente Cordiale, between the French and the Russians in 1894, and the British joined them in 1904, and this is a defensive alliance against Germany, but basically an attack on one is probably an attack on all, and probably there's some wiggle room, especially for Britain, and the Triple Alliance of Germany, Austria, Hungary, and Italy. Italy gets enticed into alliance with Germany and Austria, even though Italy's primary territorial aims are against the Austrians. They still want the Tyrol, that mountainous region northwest of Venice, and they want Istria, the peninsula due east of Venice, dangling from the northern coast of the Adriatic Sea. Both of them are controlled by the Austrians. But still, Italy is part of the Triple Alliance. And where we left things off, because of the example of the Prussian and German forces attacking boldly into France and winning a decisive victory in the 1870-71 Franco-Prussian War, European armies became obsessed with the principle that attack is the only way you win a war. And that's true, but it can be taken way too far. So the battle plan of every general staff in Europe was to sweep hard into the enemy territory and conquer. The ultimate example of this is the German battle plan called the Schlieffen Plant, named after Count von Schlieffen, who was the head of Germany's general staff in 1906. The Schlieffen Plan imagined a giant wheeling attack in the west around Paris. I put it in a slightly wrong place, but you get the idea. So the Germans would hold here, they would hold in the east, and they would attack through Belgium, and initially also through Holland, although they didn't need to. Bless you. The problem that most politicians didn't appreciate was that because of the way conscription worked in Europe before World War I, armies could be expanded rapidly through a process called mobilization. Every male who isn't physically or mentally disabled serves in the military in these countries for 2 or 3 years. The Germans 3. And then they go to college. So they go to high school, they go to the military, and then they go to college. That's or into their careers. That's the way it works. And not many people went to college, but some did. Actually, in Germany, more than most. From the time of their leaving the forces full time, for the next 20 years or so, these men were members of the active reserves. Then they were members of the inactive reserves. And then they were not part of the army system at all. By mobilizing the active reserves, the German army would become an army, instead of a couple 100,000 men, an army of a few million in just a few weeks. And these men in the active reserves took part in annual training for a couple of weeks. They once a month would go, our National Guard is the equivalent of their active reserve. And so mobilization was going to be important in whatever war scenario there was. But what the politicians and many generals didn't fully appreciate was that because there were so many men being shunted through a rail system that was extensive but still limited. It was a rail system, not a road network. Troops were still primarily moved by train. That you had, in order to mobilize and deploy your troops, you had to actually deploy your troops into enemy territory in the early days of the war, in the early days of mobilization, should I say. Politicians believed that they could use mobilization like brandishing a gun, which is a stupid thing to do. Brandishing a gun is like pulling a revolver, cocking it. That's pulling the hammer back so that you just need a slight touch on the trigger to discharge the weapon. And going and saying, give me all your money or your lives. That's brandishing a gun. I was taught, don't ever draw a gun on a human being unless you intend to kill them. None of this shoot them in the leg stuff. This is something I learned from my mom, who's a veteran police officer, which means you don't draw a gun casually. You don't draw a gun needlessly. You don't draw a gun in a situation where life is not being threatened. But if you draw a gun, don't mess around. Don't shoot them in the leg. Don't brandish it. I mean, you can say, immediately stop, and if they immediately stop, fine. But if they don't, you kill them. That's what guns are for. Guns are not magic wands. They don't make you have all power to make everyone do what you want them to do. It's not like in the movies. When a gun is drawn and aimed at you, your adrenaline goes through the roof, and people make stupid mistakes. In any event, mobilization, most politicians thought, was like drawing a gun, cocking back the hammer of the revolver, and brandishing it. You're threatening everyone. They thought it was an act short of war. Just like a dumb-bottomed criminal can think that drawing a weapon and pulling back the hammer is an act short of attempted murder or manslaughter. Well, no, it would be attempted murder, not manslaughter. What they didn't understand was that the nature of the mobilization plans involved putting German troops on Luxembourg and Belgian soil within 24 hours of mobilization. Now that's active war stuff. There is no step between mobilizing and going to war, not in terms of the military battle plans. But most politicians assume that there is. This is a fatal oversight because it's going to make politicians make calculations about threat displays that aren't threat displays, they're acts of war. So Europe is poised with two alliance systems of very aggressive countries at the peak of their aggression. Countries that have had no personal experience with great wars, with general wars. Everyone who experienced the Napoleonic Wars directly is dead. Most of the people who were raised by those people who were affected by the Napoleonic Wars are also dead. So there is no real living memory of what it's like to fight a real war. The closest thing you have is the British experience in South Africa with the Second Anglo-Boer War of 1899 to 1902. But that's a colonial war. The Europeans, for whatever reason, do not look closely at the land battles of the American Civil War because they assume it's frontier conflict. That's not. The Civil War directly hints at the kind of war World War I is going to be. There are predecessors to the trench lines and to a number of other things, the stalemates. In the Russo-Japanese War, there are also signs of what is to come. But most European officers assume that World War I is going to be a latter-day Napoleonic war. The uniforms of the French are bright. This deep, 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 bright blue, bright red trousers. The Germans wear helmets made of leather that have spikes on them, the piccolo, which is not necessarily great for cover. And at first, their uniforms aren't at all blendy in. The only people that wear uniforms that are even close to something that will blend into the environment is the British with their khaki. The word khaki means dust. It's from Hindi. And the British develop and start using khaki uniforms during their experience in South Africa. The last time I think the British fought in their red coats was certainly during the Anglo-Zulu War, maybe during the attack on the Mahdi's forces in 1898 in the Sudan, maybe, I'm not sure. But they were transitioning over to khaki because they wanted their troops to be less visible, less easy targets. The weapons were simply getting more accurate at longer ranges. So the European militaries, while they had a few young thinkers who appreciated how bad the new war might get, and none of them really understood how bad it would get, were not staffed with battle-hardened people, for the most part, who understood where things were going. And the political system was staffed by politicians who had no personal experience with the horrors of a general war. Instead, their experiences were of playing blind man's bluff with other great powers over colonial issues. They did not understand. This lack of personal experience is going to mean a lack of commitment to keep the peace. Because there is this curiosity, what if? The same curiosity a boy gets when he builds a model airplane. Spends months on it. I don't know if people still do that, but they used to. You build out of plastic a model kit, you paint so that it's this perfect replica. And then what do? Well, it's a rare boy that's able to put that airplane on a shelf and leave it there for display. Some can. Many, however, feel the need to do something with it, like blow it up. Can it fly? What if we put fireworks in it? What if we put a lot of fireworks in it? Kaboom. By the way, don't do that. You could lose your sight. You could lose your hand. It's not a good thing to do. Now, to make things even worse, there is a powder keg in Eastern Europe that is getting worse and worse and worse in the Balkan regions north of Greece and south of Romania, west of Constantinople and east of the Adriatic. Because this area is a multicultural quilt. And anyone who thinks that multiculturalism is easy has never studied history. Multiculturalism does not usually lead in mutual love between cultures. Usually it leads to mutual hate and resentment and contempt and a sense of aggrievedness. We have to share our town with these people. It is not a paradise. In the Balkans, because of their time under the Greeks and under the Ottomans, and because of their ethnic and religious mix, it's just multicultural everything. You've got Catholic Christians, Greek Orthodox Christians, Serbian Orthodox Christians, Russian Orthodox Christians, Muslims in Bosnia, Muslims in Turkey. You've got Albanians, Bulgars, Turks, Serbians, Montenegrins, Albanians, Croats, Slovenes, who else? Bosnians, Bosnian Muslims. You got different language groups. It is a mixture. It's like India in places. There are towns that just have so many different kinds of people in them living cheek by jowl, and there isn't a clear division point. And this is an age of nationalism, where everyone with their own culture and language group wants their own country. Well, the Serbs are trying to expand in the Balkans. Serbia is an Eastern Orthodox Slavic area in the northern and central Balkan region. And the Serbs have been fighting against the Austro-Hungarian Empire both directly and indirectly for a very long time. Now, there are a series of Balkan Wars between 1910 and 1914. And these Balkan Wars kicked the Turks out of almost all of their European territories. This provides opportunities and conflicts because who's going to, you fight. Is Bulgaria going to get bigger? Is Serbia going to get bigger? Are the Austro-Hungarians going to march in? Where does Greece stop and Montenegro start? Macedonia start? Where does Greece stop and Turkey start? So these Balkan Wars are not just between the non-Turks against the Turks, they end up having tensions and fights between non-Turks as well. It is messy, it is nasty stuff. And the Russians get involved. Little Slavic brothers of Serbia, you must understand, we are great power, great Russians. We are called great Russians, of course. And we love you because you are us, and we will take care of you. If those Germans from Austria come against you directly, we have your back. So the Russians, because of an idea called Pan-Slavism, the idea that all members of the Slavic racial and ethnic group should be working in concert with one another against their German enemies, began assuring the Serbs that the more aggressive they are, it's okay, because if they trip war with Austria, the Russians will go to war with Austria. Okay. Bosnia-Herzegovina is the eye of the hurricane. It's the heart of the storm. But unlike the eye of a hurricane, there's a lot of wind there. The center, though. Bosnia is probably the most divided area of a very divided Balkan region. Austria decides that it's not enough to occupy Bosnia-Herzegovina, which it's done for the last decade or two. Austrian troops have been in Sarajevo, the capital of Bosnia, and they have occupied the area. But they decide around the time of the Balkan Wars, to formally annex it, incorporating Bosnia-Herzegovina into the Austro-Hungarian Empire. It's one thing to have control of something. It's another thing to formalize that. When the Austrians formalized their control over Bosnia-Herzegovina, the Serbs go a little apoplectic because they want Bosnia. The Serbian government establishes several secret societies, chief of which in Bosnia is known as the Black Hand, which is a euphemism for a terror group within Europe. The Serbian Black Hand is staffed by ardent Bosnian Serb nationalists who want to kick the Austrians out and also add it to Serbia, add Bosnia-Herzegovina to Serbia. The heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne is a liberal in many respects. His name is Archduke Franz Ferdinand. Now, Archduke Franz Ferdinand sees the Austro-Hungarian Empire as something that needs to modernize progressively. What he particularly wants is to add a bunch of peoples who are now subjugated by the Austrians and the Hungarians to the partnership akin to what the Austrians and the Hungarians have. In other words, different nations within the Austro-Hungarian Empire can have their own domestic government. They can run their own domestic affairs. The Hungarians already do. What is shared is the common loyalty to the Habsburg monarchy. What is shared is also a common foreign policy and a common defense policy or military policy. Austria and Hungary share the monarchs, they share the military policy, they share the foreign policy. But the Hungarians run their own country otherwise. That is what Franz Ferdinand wants for the other groups within the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Franz Ferdinand believes that this is the only way that they will remain loyal to the empire, by giving them partnership with the ruling peoples, by making them fellow ruling peoples who have some independence and some unity. Now, to show his independence streak, and also to show you what kind of man he is, he falls in love with a common woman named Sophie. This common woman is not approved of by the old Kaiser Franz Ferdinand. This common woman is not a royal and should not be considered a royal. Franz Ferdinand will not give her up. He marries for love. Their marriage is what is called morganatic. A morganatic marriage is a marriage that will allow Franz Ferdinand to become emperor, but none of their children, because they're going to be half common. Instead, after Franz Ferdinand, it'll go to Franz Ferdinand's brother Karl and his children. So a morganatic marriage is going to rob Franz Ferdinand and Sophie, rob whatever children they may have, of the imperium. But he loves Sophie so much, he marries for love and not for matters of state. So whether this indicates to you an immature fellow who's selfish or a man of principle is a question of your own values. He's an interesting guy. He decides, as part of his efforts to let people know that when his old father passes, that there is hope, he wants to show his face to the peoples of the empire. So he arranges in June of 1914 to go to Sarajevo in Bosnia. He and his wife Sophie are going to tour the city, they're going to meet local dignitaries, and they're going to speak of a hope for a time when Bosnians will be able to take their place besides Austrians and Hungarians as masters of their own affairs within the empire. They arrive at the train station in the morning, they get into a motorcade of motor cars, and these motor cars start going through the various sites of the city in order to have the Archduke see them, but also to have the people of Sarajevo see the Archduke and his wife. He's in a resplendent white uniform with big feathers. His wife is dressed in a beautiful white gown. They're basically very, very, very visible. That's the point, to be seen. The Black Hand decides this is an opportunity that can't be wasted. This is the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne. So the order is given to various cells within the Bosnian Black Hand to kill the Austrian Archduke. Yevrio Princip is the head of one of these cells. He and his men have a plan. They know the route, at least they think they know the route that the Archduke will go on in the morning, and so they arrange to have a bomb ready, and when the time comes, the bombs will be thrown at the Archduke's car, and presumably he and his wife will be blown up. So, as the motorcade is moving at walking pace, because these are early automobiles, and the point is for the Archduke to wave and to notice people, make eye contact, and be seen, they're putting it along at a walking pace. And then, within an hour before they're going to break for lunch, there's a disruption in the crowd, and a couple of bombs are hurled towards the Archduke's car. One of the bombs is deflected out of the car and explodes without harming the Archduke or his wife. The other one lands in the car in front of him, explodes, kills various aides of the Archduke and members of the local gentry, but not the Archduke or his wife. Still, this is enough to get the cars to speed up, and they head to the palace for luncheon. And at the palace, there's a big, fancy lunch. Speeches are made. And there's preparations for a great dinner ball that's going to happen that evening. And the security people begged the Archduke, you know, we have the luncheon, we're going to have the ball, we went around the town, we were seen by a lot of people, please, let's change our plans so that you don't go out into that city, onto those streets this afternoon. The fact that there was a bomb thrown within yards of you and your wife should indicate that the streets are not pacified, that there are violent anti-Austro-Hungarian influences here in the city. Please, let's just settle for the luncheon and for speeches at the ball. We're going to still see and be seen by thousands of the important people. And Franz Ferdinand says, no. If we alter our plans, the terrorists win a psychological victory. B, I'm not going to let them do that. They failed. You guys are really good at providing security. I trust you, and I am here to be seen not just by the important people, but by the people. And if they see that I am not afraid of these terrorists, it's going to make an impression on them. This is why I'm here, to make the right impression on the people of Bosnia and Herzegovina, particularly of Serbia. We're going. So that afternoon, the motorcade returns to the streets, leaving the palace. Meantime, Princip and the others escaped from their attempted murder of the Archduke. They were not caught. They scattered, though. And Princip himself is wandering the streets, just furious. How could we miss? We're so close. And he's wandering the streets with a revolver. Now we come to one of those moments that if it was in a novel or a movie, it would be considered so contrived as to be unbelievable. The leader of the motorcade makes a wrong turn. The leading car of the motorcade, which is supposed to basically stay to the big boulevards, makes a wrong turn and goes into a narrow warren of narrow, winding streets, buildings looming overhead. So the motorcade follows the lead car, which has made the wrong turn, slowly through these neighborhoods. Not neighborhoods that the security forces had previously vetted. Anyway, as they go around a turn down the street, who's there but Princip walking around brooding, and he hears and he looks up and he cannot believe his eyes. They're there. There they are. Right there. And when they get close, bam, 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 bam! And he runs, shooting the Archduke and his wife, emptying his revolver, and then fleeing into the crowd. The motorcade speeds up, heads back to the palace, but both the Archduke and Sophie bleed out before they get too far. Everyone in the official life of Sarajevo hits the streets to find this guy and find out who he was. And by nightfall, they're on his trail, and before midnight, he's arrested. He's then taken in and tortured to find out what he was doing, who he was working for, who were his accomplices. And like everyone, eventually, he gives up this information under torture, because despite what the press likes to say, torture works. Otherwise, it wouldn't be used. You got to be careful about it. You got to be careful that your own people aren't destroyed by it, because the torturer is just as harmed by the act of torturing someone as the torturee, at least in terms of their mental health. But it becomes clear that Gavrilo Princip and his assassination of the Archduke and his wife were ordered by a foreign government. That's an act of war. And now, with Princip in their hands, the Austrians have proof that the Serbians ordered the assassination of the heir to the throne. That would be like the Chinese government getting caught red-handed ordering the assassination of Vice President Harris. Not a good idea.
So, are they sure that it was, completely an accident, or do you think possibly someone could have been, paid off?
I don't think they were paid off. I think it's pretty clear that it was an accident. And what it does is it should show you something about plans. There are people who I like and respect who tend to believe in conspiracy theories. I am not one of them. And one of the reasons I am not, I think there are people who are trying to control the world. The World Economic Forum, with their notions of a great reset that's designed to strip me and you of property rights within the next 9 years, that doesn't thrill me. But I don't think that any group of human beings is capable of planning like the Bavarian Illuminati or any other conspiratorial group, the Freemasons or whatever, are supposed to be. Nobody's that clever, and nobody can take into account all random factors. The fact that a guy makes a mistake that causes the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife Sophie, to me, is proof that no matter how much you plan for something, in reality, you're dealing in a universe that has random factors all over the place. So, no, I don't think he was paid off. I think it was a genuine accident. I think if the Austrians had found out, no, they checked. They had every interest to check. So, the Austrians have the Serbs red-handed. And the Serbs have been a thorn in Austria's side for years. So, the Serbs basically let it be known, God, it was a mistake. We are willing to listen to any reasonable demand that we can meet in order to preserve the peace and atone for the truly stupid actions of our Secret Service. The head of the Austro-Hungarian General Staff, Konrad von Hötzendorf, decides that this is the opportunity Austria has been waiting for. So there are a series of demands, and most of them are harsh but reasonable. The Serbs basically say, yes, 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 no. The only demand that they refuse is Hötzendorf's insistence that Austrian troops and police be allowed into Serbia to have free rein to investigate the Black Hand organization and the Serbian Secret Service and conduct arrests on Serbian soil. Anyone who allows a foreign police force and military force onto their soil with a free hand to do whatever they think is necessary is surrendering their sovereignty. They're basically inviting invasion. So the Serbs say, before they say no, they check with Russia. Foreign Minister Satsunov of the Russian Empire sees an opportunity here. If Austria goes too far, and asking for troops to go into Serbia is going too far, the Austrians may be able to smack down the Russians may be able to smack down the Austrians. So Satsunov says to the Serbs, do not worry, little Slavic brothers, we have your back. So the Serbs say no to the troops. So the assassination happens. The Serbs admit culpability, and oh God, we really want to try to make this right if we can. The Austrian General Staff, Konrad von Hötzendorf, says we're going to punish Serbia and demands that Austrian troops be allowed into Serbia. The Serbs check with Russia. Russia says, we got your back. You can say no to that unreasonable demand. The Serbs say no. Now, when the Austrians get this response, they then finally contact the Germans. The Kaiser is on his yacht in the fjords of Norway on summer vacation. But he gets word, and he and the Archduke Franz Ferdinand, they were sort of friends. In any case, the Kaiser is furious that a royal was assassinated in this way. So impulsively, the Kaiser, which is the way he is, the Kaiser says, do not worry, Austria, we have your back. So the Russians give the Serbs a blank check by saying, we have your back, with the Austrians. The Austrians check with the Germans say, we have your back. And then the Austrians say, we're mobilized. What they hope for or expect is that the Serbs will give in, or maybe the Serbs will fight. But when the Austrians mobilize against Serbia, and the Serbs mobilize against Austria, the Russians mobilize against Austria. When the Russians mobilize against Austria, France mobilizes against Germany because they were allies. Germany mobilizes against the Russians and the French. And everyone thinks we can still pull it back. But once mobilization starts, you can't. The hammer has been pulled, the trigger has been squeezed, The ignition of the gunpowder charge is happening, and that bullet is going downrange by ballistic laws that no one can change. But no one really understands this. Then, as part of their Schlieffen Plant, the Germans attack through Belgium. They don't attack Holland, but they attack through Belgium. The British have a defense agreement with the Belgians, in addition to having treaties with the French and the Russians. The British so far have tried to be neutral. The Germans expect the British to be neutral. But when the British see Germany invade Belgium, they tell the Germans, you got 48 hours to get your troops the hell out of Belgium or we're going to war. The Germans can't imagine that Britain will go to war over a scrap of paper, which they call their treaty, which is a deep misreading of the British character. The British are men of principle. They're definitely going to go to war over a scrap of paper. So, as Foreign Minister Edward Grey of the British Empire says, as Britain goes to war, the lights are going out all over Europe. Now, remember this chain of events when we talk about the end of World War I and Germany being blamed for the war. No, Germany was like 5th or 6th in the chain of causality that led to World War I. Thank you for your time. Have a good day. And remember, turn in your stuff. Also, because we didn't do the Baker quiz today, we're doing it tomorrow. Wow, we may do that along with your exam. So you got an exam tomorrow, you may have a Baker quiz too. We'll see. Have a good day.